These are the blunders from down thunder that made Australia great.
On Saturday, the 18th of August, 1984, a fairly mediocre horse named Fine Cotton was entered in a fairly mediocre horse race known as the Commerce Novice 2nd Division Handicap at Eagle Farm Racecourse in Brisbane. The only remarkable thing was that on the day of the race, the horse, which started as an outsider at odds of 33 to 1, was the subject of a betting plunge and started the race as the favourite at odds of 7 to 2.
Welcome to this episode of Blunders Down Under, laughable lessons from the past, in which we talk about dumb decisions from the past which have helped make Australia great. I'm Josh McGrath.
And I'm John Gibbs, and today we're talking about John Gillespie, the leader of the bumbling gang of crooks behind the Fine Cotton affair.
So who was John Gillespie?
John Patrick Gillespie was a serial entrepreneur, and most of his money-making schemes were on the wrong side of the law. After the 1974 Queensland floods, he had fraudulently claimed money from the Government Compensation Fund. He'd held up a betting shop with a plastic pistol. He'd bought $100,000 worth of opals from 8 dealers, all on the same day, and paid them with cheques that bounced. He was a bloodstock agent, a used car salesman, and a police informer. And by the time of the Fine Cotton affair, he'd been convicted over 300 times and was known as the King of Cons.
On this occasion, what was Gillespie's plan for making money?
John Gillespie hatched up a plan of substituting a fast horse for a slow horse in a race and making money by betting on it. The plan was to buy 2 horses which looked like each other, enter the slow one in a few races to convince everyone that it wasn't any good, then do a switch and run the fast horse and win a race. While doing time in Boggo Road Jail, Gillespie shared his plan with fellow inmate Pat Haitana, who thought that his brother Hayden Haitana, a horse trainer, might be interested in helping.
So what did Gillespie do when he got out of Boggo Road Jail?
Gillespie borrowed some money and bought a poorly performing picnic galloper named Fine Cotton for $2,000, and another horse named Dashing Solitaire, which had performed much better, for $10,000. He sent Fine Cotton to Hayden Haitana's stable for training, while he sent Dashing Solitaire to Wendy Smith, who knew nothing about the proposed swap. Haitana proceeded to enter Fine Cotton in various races, always making sure he had a long and tiring gallop on the morning of the race. And in his last start, before the day of the planned switch, Fine Cotton ran 10th in a race at Doomben.
So what happened to the substitute horse, Dashing Solitaire?
A fortnight before the race, Gillespie arranged for Wendy Smith to transfer Dashing Solitaire to Hayden Haitana's stable. However, shortly after the transfer, Dashing Solitaire ran into a barbed wire fence, and there was no prospect of recovering in time for the race. Although the facts are a bit unclear, it's thought that some serious underworld figures were involved in the planned scam by now, and backing out was not an option. This meant that Gillespie had to do some fast work to come up with a new plan of action.
So what was this new plan of action?
The new plan was to locate and purchase another fast horse that was about the same size and age as Fast Cotton. The best that they could find was a horse named Bold Personality, which had a price of $20,000. Gillespie didn't have anywhere near that amount of money, but that didn't stop him from writing out a cheque for $20,000 to the owner, Bill Nahum, and he sent a member of his gang to collect the horse in a Corolla towing a borrowed horse trailer. The horse was wearing a thick blanket, and after a journey of 6 hours in a closed-in trailer, arrived exhausted and dehydrated.
What did they do with the dehydrated horse?
Hayden Haitana shoved a hose up the horse's nose and into his stomach, which was then filled up with water to provide rapid rehydration. While pulling the hose back out of the horse's nose, a blood vessel in the nose was ruptured and blood was spilling everywhere. This was another disaster, as any horse which has a bleed is automatically disqualified from racing for 3 months, and for obvious reasons they couldn't call a vet for assistance.
So how did they solve this nosebleed?
Hayden's solution was to tie the horse's head to the stable rafters to stop the bleeding. This was effective, but it wasn't likely to improve the horse's performance in the race.
So how similar did Bold personality look to Fine Cotton? Would ordinary racegoers be able to tell the difference?
This was another problem for Gillespie and his gang. They'd managed to get their hands on a fast horse through a fraudulent transaction, but they hadn't managed to get a horse that looked like Fine Cotton. Bold personality was a bay with black legs, whereas Fine Cotton was brown with white socks. Their solution was to use hair dye. They did a tour of the local chemist shops and bought up as many packets of Clairol henna hair dye as they could find. Unfortunately, hair dye doesn't work on horses the same way as on humans, and soon the horse was red like a Hereford bull.
And how did they respond to this disaster?
They then tried to wash as much of the dye off as they could, and instead concentrate on giving the horse white socks. This time, they decided to use Taubman's high-gloss white paint. The paint wouldn't dry on the wet horse, but it was too late to try anything else. Haitana bandaged the horse's back legs so that the white paint wouldn't show.
So what happened when they eventually arrived at the racetrack?
Hayden Haitana was summoned to the steward's room. He thought the game might be up already, but he was just fined $2 for being late in naming the jockey. The jockey, Gus Philpott, was unaware of the substitution. He thought the trainer was looking rather nervous when he mounted the horse, and he thought the horse was sweating an odd colour. The man who'd sold them the substitute horse, Bill Nahum, was there at the racetrack, but he obviously hadn't tried to cash his $20,000 cheque yet, so he was unaware that he'd been defrauded. The stewards hadn't noticed anything wrong by the time the race started.
And how did the race go?
Despite everything that had happened to him, Bold personality raced to the front of the pack. Much to his surprise, the jockey Gus Philpott discovered that the horse he was riding was a real chance. The race was tight all the way, and Bold personality won the race by a short half head. Gillespie's gang had a brief moment of glory.
What happened after this win, after the race?
As soon as the race was over, shouts of "Ring in!" came from the crowd. Paint was still running down the horse's legs. Bill Nahum recognised that the winner was his horse, and not Fine Cotton. The steward stopped proceedings before the bookmakers paid out any money, and within 30 minutes they declared that Fine Cotton had been disqualified, meaning that any bets on the horse would not be paid out and would not be refunded.
So what happened to John Gillespie?
Well, members of Gillespie's gang were arrested and tried, but Gillespie himself had mysteriously disappeared. He was eventually caught in Victoria, hiding in a cupboard in his sister's house.
And
He was sentenced to 4 years imprisonment for his role in the Fine Cotton affair, but his story didn't end there. In 1996, he was involved in a fraudulent scheme to import horses from England into Thailand. In 1998, he was in the Philippines, selling passports to the imaginary nation of Melchizedek. In the 2000s, he was conning investors in Australia into property scams, anti-wrinkle cream scams, and anti-arthritis cream scams.
And what happened to Fine Cotton?
Fine Cotton lived out his unremarkable life in an unremarkable way, eventually dying in 2009 at the ripe old age of 32.
So, what's the moral of this story?
If you're planning to run a ring-in, don't put your fast horse in a paddock with a barbed wire fence.